Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I have Janet Hampton, Lenina Teal, Rena Bryson, Gloria Bean, and Olivia Edwards here with me.
Okay, great. How many are we expecting to join?
The RA should be on the call, and who else did we invite? And whomever they invited.
Okay. All right, very good.
And I see Deborah Higgins, she signed in on the computer.
Yeah, she did. So,
yeah, I'm on the call.
Okay, great.
Gail.
Oh, and Gail's on there, and I'm not sure who else.
Yeah, she's on.
Hi, and you know what? Are you guys on a webinar, or are you just on the phone, Latanya?
We're on both.
Oh, good. Okay, no, perfect. That's what we needed. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Okay. We'll wait just a second, see if, because we have people that are starting to log on. So far we see 6 and you guys. Do you have a good weekend?
Of course, all days off of work are wonderful.
I know, right?
Hello,
Okay, tell Chelsea that.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Annie Rivera.
Hi.
Hello.
All right. You guys want to get started, or you want to wait another minute or so?
No, go ahead, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Well, I thank you guys for taking the time to get on the call with us. And, you know, Latanya and I have been talking about really giving a more, not totally in-depth, but just more of a broader overview of what the expectation is for TANF under WIOA. And I have my colleague, Mark Burgess, with me, and he does policy and is also staff to our Workforce Innovation Board. So he and I are going to kind of co-present. He's going to talk just briefly about the larger system and how that impacts the board. So again, thank you guys for participating, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I just want to get through a couple housekeeping things. We initially were going to do a webinar kind of format, and I know we're using a webinar room, but we're just going to leave this as an open discussion. So feel free to stop us with any questions at any point in time, and we'll try to address them right then instead of waiting until, say, the end of the presentation or at least a section or two. So, you know, the phone lines will be open. You can ask there if you don't feel comfortable asking or want to wait. You can also type any questions or comments in the chat pod onto the left. Hopefully you all have the presentation material, which is available in the files pod in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can select it and then download it and open it up to view there or print off for future use. We are recording this, so if there's some staff that weren't able to join us today, we'll be able to send you a link to where that recording is going to be saved at on Illinois WorkNet, and then those staff can go out there later, or anybody can go out there later and review the presentation in full discussion. That's pretty much it. Housekeeping today with this small of a group. We just want to, as Lisa said, kind of make the connection between WIOA and how each of the partners kind of coexist in the system, especially how TANF joins with all of us as there are 16 partners here in Illinois. We are representing Title 1B, which is the workforce services. So much of the discussion you'll see, may seem like it only applies to us, but really it doesn't. Because this is one system now under WIOA, which is kind of a change from the previous act. While the intent was to have all of us work together, it just never came together in Illinois that way in a very cohesive fashion. So under WIOA, we want to make sure that we're all working together, especially in those comprehensive centers where we have staff from all of the programs, either physically located or have programs available by technological means. And so we're going to, present this information, but also add to it. Lisa and I, again, we are part of the Title 1B program, but we're staff to the State Workforce Board. And so, we also are involved in a lot of governor's initiatives around workforce and even education. And so we want to bring those perspectives to the discussion. So you'll see a lot of information on the slides, but there'll be a lot more information provided beyond just those. So on this next slide, you see where, it is now known as the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is an acronym of WIOA, which replaced back in July of 2014 the Workforce Investment Act, WIA, or some people refer to it as WIA, with implementation beginning on July 1, 2015. Now, to keep things in focus, a lot of the provisions went into place July 1st, 2015, but here in Illinois and throughout the country, some of the due dates that were necessary for certain components were delayed to 2016 and even all the way to July 1st, 2017. So we've been continuing to get guidance from the United States Department of Labor, the United States Department of Education as well, who jointly provide us with all of our guidance. In addition to the Act, we also have Federal Register of Final Rules. In many cases, if you're not familiar with those repeat what's in the Act, but there are also many more provisions added and or even changed from the original Act. And if you're not familiar with the Federal Register, the other thing that comes into play with that guidance is that there's what's called a preamble, which provides the answers to many of the questions that were asked and concerns that were presented in an open commenting period from everyone that is related to the system. So that preamble is really very critical to understand why changes might have been made, why new additions were added from what was put out in the Act. And I recommend that anyone that is involved to a level where they need to know those kind of decisions, review the preamble to those Federal Registers as well. And then finally, I just want to add that the third set of guidance that we have to work off of is that United States Department of Labor's Employment and Training Administration, they issue training and employment guidance letters known as TEGLs, and those provide even further requirements and guidance to the system, and some of those have been coming out in the last couple weeks. So as you can see, while implementation started 2 years ago, it's been an ongoing process. With the majority of it will be complete by July 1 of 2017, but we know there's still going to be some things left to be put in place. And so we're going to continue working with all of you. And I don't know, some of you may be on the interagency team where all of our partners come together on a monthly basis to have some of those discussions and see exactly how each of these provisions affect all of us. So if you are and have some insight and would like to add that or have some questions from those meetings, again, please join the discussion and let us know. The system itself is universally accessible. It's customer-centered, and one of the main components as far as training of our customers is that they're very focused on job-driven training, work-based training models. And so we are working with not only customers such as workers and unemployed individuals, we're also working with businesses and employers to try and make those connections so we can find our customers, yours and ours alike, good-paying jobs. WIOA increased the emphasis on partnering agencies, collaborating to create a seamless, customer-focused, one-stop delivery system that integrates service delivery across all the programs and enhances access to training and services. So again, to reemphasize the point that really WIOA, what it's trying to do is bring everyone together. And so when a customer walks in the door, when a phone call goes out to an employer or someone knocks on their door, to them, they don't know what program we're from. To them, it doesn't matter. They just want to know what's available to them and how they can be helped reach their goals, whether that be get a certificate or a degree and ultimately a job, or finding individuals that can meet their needs, filling positions that are in need, or upscaling customers we already have on, or they may already have on board in employment. So, the seamlessness is really a key in that we all want to work together through the one-stop operator of our workforce centers or one-stop centers in ensuring that those things are being met. Some of the examples of the work-based learning that we're focusing on here in Illinois and throughout the country are registered apprenticeships, on-the-job training, transitional jobs, and incumbent worker training, which is one of the few times where our customers can be employed already, is through incumbent worker training and getting those upskills. Across the system, continuous improvement is supported through evaluations, accountability, identification of best practices, and data-driven decision-making. And one thing to add to that is recently a policy was issued through the State Workforce Board or the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board on certifications of our one-stops, one-stop centers, and that's going to be the first mechanism to kind of verify all of that last sentence I said, talking to the evaluations, accountability, identification of best practices, and continuous improvement in general. So all of you should be familiar, get yourself familiar with that certification process to ensure that when the local boards start coming to the facilities and reviewing the operations, you're prepared for what they're going to be looking for.
And I would want to add one other thing. I'm sure you all have been following the TANF reauthorization that's sitting out there. And I think when we talk about accountability for the one-stop system, it's important to know that unless that reauthorization bill changes, the performance metrics for TANF are aligning. I don't think they're quite the same, but they're certainly aligning with what the performance measures are under WIOA, which are earnings, retention, employment, and credential attainment. So just giving that as an example of another way as you engage in the one-stop system in the local areas, that you're thinking about how those performance metrics may impact your customers as well. Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think we know why we're here today, but just to reinforce it, your TANF's now a mandatory partner. The governor could opt out, but in Illinois we chose not to. I think what's important is your seat at the table so that you can provide input on the services that are provided in your areas. We also, want to make it clear that it's not just about adults and dislocated workers. This is also an opportunity for us to work together on out-of-school youth, which we know some of those might be TANF participants.
Yeah, Olivia had a question, and
Okay.
we trying to go back just to repeat. Olivia, were you speaking to the continuous improvement list of items
Yeah, I think
that the system, okay, the things that we're looking for and the local boards will be looking for through certification as directed by the state board are those continuous improvements that are supported through evaluation, accountability, identification of best practices, and data-driven decision-making.
Right, and the performance metrics are earnings, retention, employment, and credential attainment. And I think I probably said those kind of backwards, because employment should be first, and then earnings, and then retention. And those also, from our perspective, and I'm not sure, and I apologize that I'm not totally clear on what they'll be for you all related to TANF, but in each of the local areas, the local boards negotiate performance measures with the state local board. So it might be in one particular area that the average earnings that the customers have to meet that are in the one-stop system, particularly those that are under Title I services, might be $26,000 for the year, and they actually take those by 6 months. The employment rate might be 80%. I think I'm a little bit high on that, but just to give you kind of an example of what those metrics will look like in an average wage might, depending on the area. It's kind of like the poverty guidelines. Those wages are dependent upon what's in the area. So it could be somewhere from $12 to $16. So those are kind of the pinpoints or examples of what that performance will look like. So I don't know, Olivia, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think, so we're going to jump into just here's some of the key changes for you all is priority of service. And that's important to know, and we'll talk a little bit more about priority of service later. But really now, under WIA, in the previous law, priority of service was based on what the local areas made a determination that they wanted those to be where it relates to barriers to employment. Under WIOA, it's now required. So if you have somebody that comes in that is a dislocated worker and you have somebody that comes in that is, low income and has some other barrier to employment, they would receive priority service over that dislocated worker when we're talking about what the funding is. And they all, regardless of the funding, priority of service, they have to serve those customers. So there has to be a way for the system to give additional funding, which we have reserved at the state level, which we're required to by law, so that we can support those. There's also an opportunity, and I don't really get too much into this, but so I'll just mention it now. There's ability to transfer funds between, because there's three formula streams, three funding streams. There's the adult, there's the dislocated worker, and then there's the youth funding stream. And under WIA, there is the opportunity to transfer funds between the adult and dislocated worker stream. So if you're seeing in your particular area a really a high concentration of people with employment barriers that are also low income or low skilled, you can transfer some of your dislocated worker money into that adult funds, into those adult funds to serve those. And we're focusing a little bit on youth here because those changes were pretty significant around eligibility. We now have an increase in the age for out-of-school youth to 24. And then it's also important, under WIOA, in-school youth, you had to spend the primary amount of your dollars on in-school youth. Now that has switched to 75%. And then of that youth allocation, the total, 20% of that has to be on work-based, some sort of paid work experience. That includes academic and occupational training.
Yeah, if I can add a couple. So trying to make the connection maybe from your TANF customer is if you have someone that has a barrier, and there's about 8 or 9, low income being one of them that many people will qualify for, and all of your people will qualify for, if I'm not correct. And so, if you've got someone that wants to get back to work, the services that are available through Title 1B that may not be available through TANF is certainly the reason why you would want to refer them to our services at the one-stop center so that they can get that education, training, or just career services. We've all written a resume and a cover letter, but maybe not to the kind of level of I guess, detail that maybe an employer would be looking for, and maybe that might be preventing someone from getting a job. So if they just want something as simple as that, we can certainly help them with that at the one-stop center through our funds, through employment services funds. We want your case managers, or I'm not sure what you call them through TANF, but to understand that they can make those referrals. And then the other thing is, what I wanted to add on this with youth, or these barriers in general, is that performance has an allowance in it that if you identify more barriers for a customer, it helps your performance.
Right.
So we want to make sure that when we're evaluating a customer and we're doing our intake, that we're identifying any barrier and all barriers that they might have. So just because they may be a TANF employee, we shouldn't go, okay, that qualifies them for our services. We're done asking them any questions on barriers. We want to know what all of them are so that we can help them address each of them, but it also helps the performance again.
We talked a little bit about, at the very beginning, around this being a more business-driven approach, and certainly employer engagement is a big part of what we now do. And we're looking at one of the things that at the local area for you to keep an eye out on is employer engagement and how we reach out to employers in a more strategic way. And as part of that, we want to make sure that we're also reaching out to the businesses where we know where the jobs are. And I'm not sure if, how many of you might have been involved in the development of the local plan, which we'll talk a little bit more later. But as part of that local plan, you're supposed to be identifying where are the jobs, where, what growth areas are they? Are they healthcare? Is it transportation? Is it IT? So those are some examples that we we look at as we find what jobs are out there. And then it's not really just about finding a job, it's how do you create a pathway for our customers to go through the system so that they finally get to a self-sustaining wage. An example of that might be in certified nursing aides. You know, those are usually relatively low-paying jobs, but what we want to do is not have them stop there. We want them to get on a pathway that would move them up maybe to an LPN, which is more of a self-sustaining wage, or they could go on to become an RN. And I think it's part of that, too. One of the things just to mention here, and in case I forget later, is while I believe one of the other populations that can be served under WIOA dollars is the underemployed. So if you have some TANF customers that might be working less than 20 hours a week, they can certainly avail themselves of the WIOA services to do just exactly what I'm talking about, get in one of those career pathways so that they're moving more towards a self-sustaining wage.
Yeah, that underemployment, they really redefined recently in these Tegels, and there's a lot of components that might qualify someone for underemployed. The hours, you know, someone wants to work full-time but can't find full-time employment. Someone wants to make a higher wage than they are making now, could be considered a reason for underemployment. And in fact, they even added to it that someone who has knowledge and education and skills already but can't seem to find a job in, you know, to utilize them to their maximum could also be considered underemployed. So there's a lot of, lot of ways that we can qualify someone for underemployed and get them into the system to get some assistance for them.
Yeah, and Olivia, yes, the employer engagement piece is part of the function of the business services team. So, and, you know, that's really not just reaching out to businesses for their jobs, but what kind of training opportunities are out there, or what kind of training opportunities do we have to develop? And an example of that would be, I know one of the things that Wren Lake College has done is worked with the, some of their manufacturers down in that area to create accelerated training programs. So rather than maybe taking, 12 weeks to up to a year or 2 semesters, they've really looked at how can they provide that training maybe in half that time. So those are some of the things that the business services team will be working with community colleges on, as well as the larger one-stop system to make those available to folks. We talked, the next slide really just, I think, an expansion on, what we've just been discussing, where we're just kind of looking at, where's the training for the high demand sectors? How do we promote program coordination that meets all the partners' needs, and then really looks at how do you make a stronger connection between education and employment and more alignment towards workforce services. So I don't know, Mark, if you want to add anything to that, or...
No, I think we've strengthened that. Kind of what we like to put in all of our messages to everyone is that under WIOA, we're looking to see how we can better affect and improve 3 components: the workforce system, education system, but also the economic development in a particular area. So we're always looking at all those, and even though the language may not specifically address any one of those at any time, we know as we're looking over whatever we're doing as developing new programs, and again, getting employer or customers trained and talking with employers, we're looking to affect all 3 of those simultaneously.
Next slide. And then again, this just reinforces the education and workforce alignment, and how do we do a seamless progression across the education spectrum that also provides, it's not just training, but it's also credentials, and how do you, and I'm going to use the term stackable credentials, but just so you know, what we really mean by that is in my example of a CNA. You get a CNA certificate, and then you move on to LPN training, and you get your license for LPN training, and then, possibly if they're, wanting to continue, they would eventually get their certification to become a registered nurse. Now we're going to get into a little bit around, I think, what, is your main responsibility and what the partners are responsible for. And there's really 3 big areas that we'll go over. And then I will send you all some additional resources so that, Latanya, you can share them with staff around, what is it, just more detail about MOU, memorandums of understanding, what does it mean to pay for the infrastructure funding, what are more detailed responsibilities around negotiating the MOUs. So the first one, which we mentioned, is around the planning. And this, of course, is to make sure that the services are coordinated and we're coordinating with businesses, and more importantly, we're really looking at what's the overall workforce strategy, what are, that's based on what are the labor market needs. You're part of also, and you may have heard a little bit about this, one of the other things that WIOA does is it has a greater focus or emphasis on regional planning. So in some of our local areas, that might be the region, but many of our local areas are made up, many of our regions are made up of one or two local workforce areas, but in the Cook County and suburban collar areas, I believe there's like 7 or 8 of them. So, a couple of the things that you're doing as part of the planning is you're, looking at what's the entire workforce development system, how do you expand that access, which we talked about a little bit, how do you facilitate the employer engagement, how do we maximize our services, how do we leverage our funds in a more strategic way so that, if, a TANF customer comes in, you all might use your TANF funds to pay for supportive services, and we could use our funds to pay for training, or at least partial. So that's one of the things that we really want to talk about as we're creating those unified plans. And then I mentioned the MOUs, and those are really what services are you going to provide in the one-stop area? For TANF, one of the things that you all need to do and that needs to be offered, more importantly, in the one-stop system is application for eligibility. So if a customer hasn't quite made it to you yet, but they've come into the one-stop, because we're really about looking at how do we do single points of entry, they could sit down in the resource room or online, and I know we've talked about the ability for them to apply online, but they would be able to apply for TANF and or food stamps and medical, or SNAP and medical online. The infrastructure costs we'll talk briefly about. All one-stop partners in the system are required to put forth infrastructure costs. If there is a particular reason why a local area can't come to an agreement on what those costs are, then there is state-level funding available that's put in by all the partners so that local areas can access that. And then, of course, that becomes that's addressed also in the MOU.
I think here we had mentioned, I know we mentioned a little bit about the State Workforce Board, the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, and how they're overseeing the entire system and have certain goals. But we also have to remember each of our local areas have local boards, and so here's the first time we see a reference to them and some of the obligations or functions that they have to be involved with, and include the negotiating of these infrastructure funds, development of local and regional plans. And so we need to keep in mind, that they've got a key place in this process as well.
So now we're going to just kind of take a look about, service delivery. The, MOU and the plan and the infrastructure funding are sort of the administrative things that you're responsible for. I'm sorry, what? Oh, Mark reminded me, does anybody have any questions about those three things? I mean, those, planning is pretty straightforward. The MOU is not quite so. I think the struggle that most of the areas are having is around infrastructure funding. That is certainly new to the system. Prior to WIOA, the Title I folks bore almost all of the costs of operating the one-stops, and that certainly has changed under WIOA, and I think part of that is to kind of, I think it is to force collaboration amongst the partners. So we have, for those of you that may not know, there are 23 local workforce innovation areas. The governor, along with chief elected officials and local boards, designate those areas. There's 10 economic development regions, and then we just reinforce our regional approach, which is joint planning. How do you integrate service delivery, share your administrative costs, and then, how are you going to enter into those agreements to make sure that happens?
I think most of you on the call will start seeing a little bit of action that will be affected by this, in the sense that there may be some reshifting of some of the counties and local areas and regions based on certain factors such as metropolitan statistic areas, census data. So we're working now to start having those discussions. And so while you may know someone working in a particular county, what they're associated with today, that there may be a few changes coming in the next year or so based on those discussions.
So we all know about the one-stop system, but what you may not know is that as required by law, each local area must have at least one comprehensive center. And that comprehensive center is really defined by, there are 16 partners that are part of the system, and each one of those has to provide services in the one-stop in some way. It can be via technology, which is an example we just gave as an online TANF application, or by actually placing somebody in the center a certain negotiated time per week, and if that's 3 days or all 5 days, whatever that may be. However, even though you have to have one comprehensive, you can still have affiliates, which that's something that you as a partner agency need to decide what makes the most sense for you. And and quite honestly, just to throw something out there, there isn't any reason why, if part of the local board would be interested in it, that your actual local offices couldn't act as an affiliate center. So those are some things that you would negotiate with the board on how you want to deliver your services. And of course, we've already talked about that TANF has to be provided in the comprehensive one-stop centers, and that you can actually do it via technology or the services. I'm going to talk about the program.
Yeah, so we're just going to quickly identify, we keep mentioning 16 programs that are required under WIOA. There's actually 4 core programs. This slide's not as clear as I thought. Maybe it's clearer on paper. And those are Title 1B, that's us, the workforce services here at Department of Commerce. Title 2, which is the Adult Education and Literacy Act programs, which are administered through the Community College Board. Title 3 is the Wagner-Pizer Act Employment Services through the Department of Employment Security. So, it's not the unemployment insurance they provide at those facilities, but it's those employment services that help with resume writing and job search, things of that nature. And then Title 4, which is the Rehabilitation Act programs found under the Department of Human Services, Division of Rehabilitation Services, and all of the various programs that they can provide. And then on the next slide, you can see the remainder of required partners. While not core, they're still very integral to the system. There's actually, if you count the 2 pages together, there's actually 17 programs. You're one of those, the 17th program here in Illinois. There's no recognized Indian or Native American program, so that last one is why we only count 16 in Illinois, because they're not part of our system here in Illinois. But certainly in some states they're a major part of it. When you think of Minnesota and Wisconsin and the number of Indian tribes still in existence and having key parts of the community there. So all of these, we try to just color code them back to the core programs if they're also part of other agencies that have core program activities. So otherwise the colors really are insignificant in anything else. So you see a wide range of opportunities to help our customers, and especially yours, because we know right off the bat there's a barrier to employment, or at least some kind of a qualifier to certain services based on them receiving TANF funds. But we want to make sure that we're, when we have intake to these customers, we're looking at all the available services and how any of them might be able to help a customer reach their goals. So, if they're a veteran, we have programs out there that address us. Maybe there's someone that just was recently released from incarceration. We have programs out there that can help that group. And in fact, we're working really closely with some of the prisons now in trying to help those individuals before they're even released, so that we can have them better prepared to reacclimate to the I guess real world, if you will, as some people will refer to it. So there's a lot of ways to assist our customers, not just Title I and TANF only. So we need to keep those all in mind.
Well, and I think, one of the other things, just as another example of integrated services, to Mark's example of us working with the prisons, you may have somebody that's incarcerated, but the other family member receives TANF. So it's important for you all to be at the table in that kind of situation so that when that person does re-enter the workforce, we're really looking at the whole family and how do you get the whole family the support services they need and then on their way to gainful employment. We also want to talk about, here's the 3 programs where we get our funding from, and I mentioned them earlier, but the adult and dislocated worker programs. For adults, are you going to switch my slide? For adults are job seekers who are at least 18 years or older, and they're either low skilled or they have low income. And that can be, lacking basic work skills. It could include an individual who's unable to compute or solve problems, read or write. ESL is also a significant low-skill population that we are interested in serving. Also, homelessness, youth that are in foster care that are 18 or over certainly fit in this criteria. Or in that particular example, they could also be an out-of-school youth. And then dislocated worker services are pretty straightforward. Those really are somebody that's lost their job through no fault of their own, or they've been dislocated, and they are unable to obtain employment in their same field. So those 2 programs, and then of course, in addition to the training, we also are able to provide supportive services. And on our youth, we talked a little bit about the expansion of the age to 24. And they've streamlined these criteria so that if they meet the age range, then they only have to have one additional barrier, like they are a school dropout, they're pregnant or parenting. A youth with a disability is another example. Certainly we talked a little bit about this, but if they're subject to the juvenile justice system, those would be some examples of additional conditions for somebody that's 16 to 24 to meet the out-of-school youth eligibility requirement. And then in school is 14 to 21. Low income is certainly another factor. And the conditions are fairly similar around, basic skills deficient if they're an English language learner. And then the other really important change that I know Illinois really tried and made sure we educated our congressional delegation on is to allow for free and reduced lunch to be an automatic barrier for at low income for an in-school youth.
Yeah, just to add on to the adult, it's a really nice catch-all for anyone 18 years and older because there's very little eligibility criteria. One that applies to all customers is that, although it really doesn't apply as strongly to youth, but certainly to adult dislocated worker, is that there's 2 requirements actually. They have to be registered or eligible to work in the United States or its territories. And second, if they're a male born after 1960, they have to be registered with the, and I'm not recalling, Selective Service, sorry.
Yeah.
So really it's very easy for most of our customers to be eligible for that adult program so long as they meet one of these barriers, and obviously your customers do. If they didn't meet the low income or other barrier, then they would fall into that other population where if there's money available, we can serve them. But if we were, if the local area was running out of money, then they'd have trouble initially, and they'd have to maybe seek out additional funds through either the dislocated worker transfer ability or through the state set-aside funds.
Just want to briefly mention the adult and youth with disabilities. That has been a significant, there's a significant emphasis in the law around serving individuals with disabilities that have employment barriers, which while it's always was part of WIA, it's certainly woven now throughout. It's sort of its own section, and we had a responsibility to serve them, but they're not a priority population, but they're certainly higher in the need to receive services because the unemployment rate is extremely high for persons with disabilities. The last time I checked, I think it was like 36%. So they, we definitely want to be able to reach out to that population, and then I think part of that is also, how do you provide a reasonable accommodation for individuals with disabilities as part of their job training or as part of the one-stop center, and that's having assistive technology, access to interpreters and those kinds of things. And then we talked a little bit, I also just have mentioned, but I want to keep emphasizing it because I think this fits your population the most, is really this priority of service. And the fact that, there's not a funding restriction like there was before on the priority of service, where they were sort of, and I hate to say it, but this is really how they were sort of an after fact, and the local board could say, when we look at priority of service for folks that are low income or low skilled, we're only going to do like those that meet 150% or 200% of the poverty level. And now they no longer have that threshold.
Then another priority that really is over all priorities, to be honest with you, is the priority services for veterans and spouses. In many cases, a spouse of an active or dislocated veterans are eligible because, as we know, veterans, they're moved around the country and actually out of the country for their service duties, and those spouses may want to work, but by the nature of having to move, they lose a job as well. They lose their employment. So they are eligible in most situations under this priority of services, to where if they're eligible for a program, they get to go first in line, basically, over all other eligible individuals. And then if there's, groups that are not, when I say eligible, I mean by barrier, they are the first in line for those. If you have customers that are eligible otherwise but not having a barrier, again, if that's an individual that is a veteran, they would have that priority as well. So they're making a key point in this act to serve those individuals that have been part of the military services.
So we've tried to weave throughout our presentation the concept of integrated service delivery and no wrong front door, which I know, when I was DHS back in the day, that was something that we were trying to work towards as well. And it's really about looking at what's the continuity of supports, and it's not just about how you go through the career pathway system, but what are the continuity of supports like transportation or child care, and how do you leverage those funds in a way? How do you look at systems that are seamless so that when a customer comes to your door or a one-stop center, they're not giving the same information over and over and over again? And we know that's been, that's historically been a huge issue for all of the customers we serve, but certainly under WIOA, there is a push and a significant emphasis on creating those integrated approaches. And I know at the state, here at the state level, and I'm not sure if Latanya or Olivia is working on this, but they are looking at what's a common front door through the Department of Innovation and Technology. So, more to come on that, and I think one of the things is, how do we look at a front door model and still be able to use our back-end systems, because all of us have put a significant amount of money to create our own case management system. So how do we have a front door that then at the back we're still able to use what's out there?
I just add, because we have these on our notes here, we've been talking for an awful lot of slides about one-stop centers, and we have to be reminded that that's kind of a general term of the locations of our services. But under WIOA, they're actually called American Job Centers, AJCs, which, as you see in our top right-hand corner of our slides, it's in conjunction with what Illinois has utilized since, I think, about, 2017 or 2007, where we call them our centers Illinois WorkNet Centers. So you're going to be seeing all three of those terms, and they're really all the same thing. American Job Center is an Illinois WorkNet Center, is a one-stop center. So hopefully people aren't getting confused thinking they're different locations or different purposes. They are all one and the same, and we have to recognize that by legal status, I guess.
Well, and I think the other important thing to add about that branding issue on the American Job Centers is the signage has to be all the same. So whenever you, and that has to be done by July of this year, but everywhere there's a comprehensive one-stop, it will have to have their outside sign include this branding. And then for materials that are paid for with Title I funds, the workforce development funds, those also have to have the Illinois WorkNet American Job Center logo on them. And so I don't know, and that's something to think about as you're negotiating your MOU, if you're going to continue, your forms are going to be one of the things that you bring to the table. However, if Title I funds would pay for those forms, they would have to have incorporated the American Job Center logo. And I do know some of the, like our adult education providers, as well as at DHS, their vocational rehabilitation is working on just putting that logo on all of their forms. So, it'll be a seamless process if they just come into the local office or if they come into the one-stop center.
The interagency team is working on details of that, and in fact, tomorrow, hopefully, we can start getting a little bit of final information that Department of Labor, their weekly afternoon webinar is actually on branding. So we'll be curious to see if there's any new information in that we can take back to the interagency team, and because we continue to get questions at the local level wondering how this is supposed to happen. What is there a size requirement? Where's it got to go? All the logistics of making it happen. And so hopefully we can get that wrapped up shortly and meet that July 1 deadline that Lisa spoke to. Okay. Under Title I, career services we used to have what was called core and intensive services, and they removed that, and now we refer to all of our services that are non-training as just career services. It's something that helps somebody get into a career, whether that be job research assistance, or maybe resume writing. Maybe somebody has a need for financial assistance. So, say a customer is working, they're low income, working, trying to improve their skills, but just can't seem to make ends meet because of that wage. Maybe we've got somebody at the local level that can help them manage their money a little bit better. Certainly, some of those career services would be appropriate for some and not others. So our career planners should be, having an assessment with those customers to identify which of those. We have, I think, 14 career services available to our customers at the adult and dislocated worker programs. And so there's quite a few things that we can help customers, all with the emphasis being on getting them employed and then getting them to self-sustaining wages ultimately. With regard to improving the TANF recipients, we want to get them access to high-quality training opportunities, and maybe one of the career services they need is some other assistance, such as adult education or things of that nature. So that assessment would be another career services to find out exactly what these customers need in order to get into training so that they ultimately can get that job. We have career counseling, so just because someone wants to come in and become some type of nuclear research physicist or something doesn't mean they could ever really attain that. So our career planners are going to sit down with the customers and talk through them and really see what kind of careers these individuals are suited for, whether before they get training or after. Some people come in and they don't want training. They either don't have the means to go to training, they've never liked school, whatever it is. Some people just don't want to go back to school. And so we have to recognize that. We try to talk them through and say, if you don't go to school, you're going to kind of limit yourself. And so maybe you should rethink that, and we can help you, succeed in school and training programs if they're just short-term. But sometimes their decision is final, and they're not going to go to school. So we have to give them these career services that will best help them improve their chances of getting employment.
Well, and I think just to add on to that, when we talk about career services, that's really another point of intersect for you all that, when you're looking at your, what counts towards your work activities, what kinds of WIOA services that are offered or the career services that are offered in the one-stops can help them meet of their work activities that they have to do. So this just want to make another connection there. And then I think the other thing that WIOA allows is if you do refer somebody to the one-stop center, or maybe I'll say when you do refer somebody to the one-stop center that's come into your local office, that the assessment that you do with them can be used by the one-stop center. So that's another way that we're looking at how do you integrate services and how do you create a common front door.
Yeah, certainly we don't want individuals having to retake tests that they've already taken, going through a different intake process with one of our other partners. And I just at this point want to kind of highlight something that we're doing here now is developing. We mentioned here in this last point that a customer should have an individual employment plan. That really is the roadmap for a customer on how they're going to get that good paying job. What all services, training, supportive services do they need to get a job should be all lined out, all agreed upon between the career planner and that customer. And what we're doing is working with our Illinois WorkNet staff to develop an online system that will track that and eventually will allow all of the partners access to it. So anybody working for any of the programs can get into that system and say, oh, they've already had this assessment. I don't have to do it again. Or no, I don't see that this has been done. So it's in my ability to provide a particular service. And once I do, I'm going to make sure I note it on there. And we're using what's called a dashboard to make it easily identified that something's been done or not, color coding, whether it's been accurately and effectively finalized, through green, red, yellow, like a stop sign, so it's very easy and user-friendly to those of us customers, the staff career planners that are working with customers.
Well, and I do also want to add one more thing because I know we talked about using the same assessment, but you all have and I think you still use that responsibility and services plan. So that's another tool that customers that you work with, in the one-stop center, you should be building off of that. The career planner should be building off of that responsibility and services plan rather than recreating something in the system. So again, just another example of how we should be looking towards integrating services. And we're going to, does anybody have any questions? Because we just gave you a whole bunch of information.
Yes, we do have a question.
Okay.
So I'd like to just go back quickly to youth, and you were outlining additional conditions for youth participation.
Yes.
For eligibility. Can you tell me what those were again?
Oh, sure. It's those in foster care. It would be a homeless or runaway. It would also be, sorry, I got to find them real quick. Thanks. School dropout would be one. One that's somebody that's in the juvenile justice system, either and can include adult for purposes of out-of-school youth. Pregnant or parenting. Also, a youth with a disability. And then it can also be in terms of low income. They can be low income and they require additional assistance to obtain employment, like an educational program, And then, of course, English language learners, whether they be a youth or adults, would also qualify as a condition. And we can send these out to you guys so that you have them at your disposal. Is that good?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Any other
questions? Okay, before we jump to the next section of training and work-based learning, one slide we probably should have added here, Lisa mentioned it early on, but we can also provide and supportive services through our funds. And many of the partner programs do not have that ability, so it's a very good connecting point to have referrals to Title I-B, in that sometimes people can't afford to go to school. They've got young children that they can't afford to send them to daycare to enable them to go to training. So supportive services might pay for that daycare and child care. They might have an elderly person that lives in the home that needs cared for and again, they can't go to school because of that, so funds can help assist that. They may not have a vehicle or have funds sufficient to pay for even a bus ride or a cab to the training program, so we can, support that transportation. There's several other supportive services that we can assist. So WIOA has made it clear that any barrier, any need that a customer might have should be looked into, and hopefully there's a means to address it.
Right, whether it's through the Title I funds or your funds or another partner's funds. And then I think the other key thing when you're looking at your customers and who is suitable for training, one of the things that they have to provide in the Comprehensive One-Stop Center is access to student loans. So they should be, helping folks apply for Pell Grants. They should be helping folks filling out their FAFSA. So another just resource for you all to remember. And then when Mark's talking about mentioning the supportive services, I think something that is really key is the local board can set limits on those supportive services. So, for example, they can, do 37 cents or whatever for mileage, or they can choose to lower it or increase it. So when you're working with the boards and your one-stop partners, just keep that in mind that there may be some parameters for that.
All right, we've mentioned a lot about training, and so we want to go a little bit more into that and work-based learning, which is really work-based kind of seems like wasn't that on the job, but under WIOA and previous under WIA, on-the-job training is just one type of work-based learning. So we have to remember that work-based is really all types of training that occurs at an employer or associated with an employer. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is putting customers in a career pathway that as Lisa mentioned before, that gets them hopefully to a self-sufficient wage. Maybe not initially, maybe not through the very first training they receive, but certainly they have a path to get to that self-sufficient wage down the road. Now, in Illinois, we don't necessarily have policy on self-sufficiency yet. Many states do and use it for an eligibility criteria for training, but certainly the Act does allude to the fact that not any wage is a good wage, unfortunately, and so we have to have a goal of trying to get them to a better wage.
And I think the other thing about, as you think about career pathway development, we have a term up there that we probably shouldn't have put because not everybody may understand it, but encourages integrated education and training. Part of that is, one offshoot of that is something that we call bridge programs, where you're looking at instruction in a contextualized way so that you're not just going through school. If you need remediation with that, you can get that remediation. And then also as part of that is when we say contextualized instruction, we mean if you need math, additional math skills, and you might be going into a pharmaceutical program. They do basic math by counting pills, or something that relates and ties back to the occupation that you're being trained in. And then, of course, we talked again, just, reinforce just the whole, a pathway for, low-skilled adults and individuals with some other sort of barrier. And then I think this is another opportunity as well where we're looking at how do you leverage resources to provide these opportunities for our customers. And for WIOA, there's many opportunities or many different ways that you can receive training, and I'm sure some of these you're certainly familiar with, but when you come into the American Job Center, the Illinois WorkNet Center, and it's just one individual, we have things that are called individual training accounts, and that's for occupational skill training that would lead to a credential or degree. The bridge training I just mentioned quickly, that's, it's upgrading your reading or math, or if you're somebody that's English is your second language, it's the contextualized learning. And then we have incumbent worker training, and we'll get a little bit more into that, but incumbent worker training is one example would be somebody that's underemployed. So so they are on the job and they have an opportunity for a promotion, so our funds can use can be used to support that type of training. And then on-the-job training or transitional jobs, I think, are things that you all are familiar with and use as part of your package of services. And then class-size training is really about if you had a group of customers, your customers that maybe all were interested in, becoming truck drivers. You can get funding that, really is more about it's economies of scale. So rather than paying $5,000 a piece for them, you're looking at, buy one, get one free or something like that, I guess is the simplest way to say that. So that's another opportunity that's new under WIOA. And then customized training is really if you have a customer that is getting ready to go to work, but they need some sort of specialized training to get that job, then there are funds available to work with that employer to offset the wages for that. And then we talked a lot about work-based learning, so I don't know, how much more we need to go over this other than we're going to give you a little more specific detail about the individual types and any limits that are on them. Registered apprenticeship is new to WIOA, and it's actually a very significant emphasis that was at the national level in the previous administration, and it has carried over into this administration. And it's really not looking at registered apprenticeships in the traditional way, which is the union and the trades, but how do you develop opportunities in other sectors and create registered apprenticeships through that. And then, of course, we mentioned the other types of work-based learning, and we'll talk a little bit about those individually.
Yeah, with the registered apprenticeships, in Illinois, the governor has really taken a strong stance that these are a good thing. The state workforce board, Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, has a standing committee looking at apprenticeships in general, not just registered. That's only one of 4 types of models they're looking at. So Illinois, they've kind of taken it a step further from what WIOA, their level of emphasis, and so they're looking, and being recognized even for the efforts they're doing. The governor has spoken publicly about the efforts of the committee on numerous occasions already. He's attended their meetings, so it's definitely something that's at the forefront of his mind and some of the initiatives he's doing, and one of them is around youth apprenticeships.
So I want to just mention transitional jobs, which I know is something that's not, while it's new to WIOA, it's not certainly new to other public-type assistance programs, but it is time-limited. The specific parameters, I think, which are the same, that are the same regardless, is, it's time-limited. It's subsidized work experience. It can be in the public or private or not-profit sectors. It has to be paid work experience, and it's really, it's for those people that are either chronically unemployed or they have no work history or an inconsistent work history. The other important thing to know about this, and when I mentioned limits on on some of these work-based learning things, transitional jobs, the board can choose to spend up to 10% of their funds on transitional jobs. And so what you really should be looking at, though, when you're thinking about, working with the board around the budgets is what's your population of TANF customers? What would be your population of SNAP customers? And so if it's exceedingly high or even on the high side, then you would really want to encourage transitional jobs as a significant training component in your local area. And then on-the-job training, of course, is on-the-job training, and it has a wage match with it, and there is also a commitment has to be made by the employer to hire that individual. And in Illinois, the law allows for up to 75% wage reimbursement, and we do in Illinois use that entire 75%. You want to talk about some of those?
Yeah, with incumbent worker, it's very similar to on-the-job training, but as Lisa gave an example earlier where someone just needs some additional skills in order to get a promotion. And the only difference really, or major difference between on-the-job training and incumbent worker is that on-the-job training, you aren't an employee of that employer until you sign on for the training. Then you become an employee subject to all employment, criteria such as wages, minimum wages and hours and things of that nature, and safety precautions. Whereas an incumbent worker is already employed, and so we're working more with the employer than we are really with the worker themselves to consider them more the customer. And there's many ways we've used incumbent worker training in the past. Mainly it's to get that upskill. Sometimes it's new machinery has come in, and maybe it's not necessarily an upskill to become a higher level employee with that employer. It may be just to be able to work with the new equipment. So we can provide the funds for that employer to maybe reach out to a manufacturer of new equipment to say, can you come in here and train all our employees? Because if we don't get that training, these employees really have no use to us as far as moving forward in our operations. So there are many ways that an incumbent worker training can be used, and a very good thing to keep people employed. Customized training is something that's just specific to an employer need. They may reach out and say, this is what I need to the local area. I need people that can do this or that. And so can you develop some kind of a training program and find the customers that can complete that successfully to meet my needs? So it's really, going back to the employer relationship with those local areas to know what their needs are. So to ensure that, the employers that are on the local workforce boards, the employers that are involved in work-based in business teams, services teams, that they understand this is out there so that they can express their needs. So we want to make sure that we are utilizing, this customized training option to ensure that we're meeting those needs.
Well, and on customized training, this is another, and on the job training, incumbent worker training, that there's funding limits. Customized training is only 50% of a wage match for anybody that's receiving that type of service, and then incumbent worker, a board can choose to spend 20% of their adult or dislocated worker funds on incumbent worker training. And I think, one of the other things we've talked about, and just to reemphasize, is when you're, looking at your population, thinking about what of these work-based learning models are appropriate, that you want to make sure that your customers are availing themselves of. And certainly incumbent worker, again, is one of those when you're working with underemployed folks. I think we're done. So that kind of wraps us up. I think we know, just having an awareness as you're working in the one-stops around, you need to be part of the planning process so that you can, really advocate or bring, your customers to the table and ensure that as part of the one-stop system, they're accessing the career services or the work-based learning opportunities or just occupational training in general. And then what kinds of things can you bring to the table and that you want to negotiate in your MOUs that you're going to do as your requirement to provide services in the comprehensive one-stop. And then, I know this is really at the larger state level, with Secretary Demas, Assistant Secretary, Director Grigsby Jackson, is what kind of funding can you support in each of those comprehensive one-stops, whether it's, offsetting the lease costs or, staffing, paying your staffing costs if you have a staff person there. How does that contribute to the overall infrastructure and resource sharing costs? So we will open it up to questions. We're happy to answer any that you might have, and if we don't have the answer, we'll certainly get it to you. And then as we were going over this information, I did write down some resources that I think would be great, Latanya, for you to share with the staff. On our website, it's called WIOA Works, and there are lots of materials on there that are specific to Illinois. The guidance around developing the MOU is on there so that you can get on there and see what is really my responsibility as the one-stop partner in participating in the MOU process. The infrastructure funding is also another resource that is on there. And then all of the Wednesday webinars that we do, I'm not sure how many of you have been able to participate in those, but we do have topic-specific webinars on, crosswalking services. We've done them on the one-stop certification. There's a requirement, and we're getting ready to do one on procurement because there is now a requirement that the one-stop operators have to be competitively procured. So that's something that is coming up that has to be done by July 1 as well. And then I'm also going to send you all, there is another site that Department of Labor sponsors, but certainly has access to and resources from HHS, from Department of Agriculture, and then Department of Education, and it's called Workforce GPS, and they also there's tons of materials and resources and best practices from other states. There's a couple of webinars, or at least 2 or 3 webinars that are specific to, working with the TANF population under WIOA, and then, around integrated services. So we'll send you that as well. They do, as I said, webinars every Wednesday as well to look at what's going on across the nation and what those best practices are. So I'll make sure you guys get that that information for yourself.
There are a couple things that Lisa mentioned that are due come July 1 of this year, and pretty major ones. One is the certification of all of our comprehensive one-stops has to be completed by July 1st. So there's issued policy in the last few weeks, and so the local boards and all the centers now are starting to work towards and through the process to get that certification completed by that date. And the second one is procuring a one-stop operator. Obviously, all the centers have had a one-stop operator in the past and currently existing now, but under WIOA, they had to go through a new process and ensure certain steps were taken to assure no conflict of interest, arm's length with the operations and the partners and that. So that has to be completed by July 1st as well. So you'll see in the system and throughout the state there's a lot of activity going on in a couple of these major things that are still trying to be finalized as far as implementation goes.
And one other thing around the one-stop operator that is interesting is it's open to state agencies. So certainly Voc Rehab and TANF could come in and apply to be a one-stop operator, so it can be a consortium of partners. And then the other thing I want to mention, Olivia, when you're asking about what are the due dates for 7/1/17, the other thing that's going to happen for us prior to 7/1/17 that I think will inform some policies going forward is we're getting a technical assistance review by the Department of Labor. And I mention that specifically because TANF is singled out as an area where they're asking us specific questions about how we're serving the TANF population and, how are we tracking that population. So I will also cut those out, Latanya, and send those to you so you'll have an idea of what the local boards and the one-stop operators in the state, quite honestly, will have to respond to in relation to TANF.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or comments or?
I have a question. What did you say about chronically unemployed?
Oh, I was just using them as an example of training that transitional jobs would be appropriate for.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. And we're actually going to do a webinar dedicated just to training and maybe more specifically transitional jobs because that's a new service under WIOA. We did not do it under WIA. So that would be, that's an example of a Wednesday webinar that we'll do coming up. And if you guys have ideas that you want to funnel up to Latanya or certainly send to us about webinars that you would like to see, there's information that you're still not quite sure about, under WIOA, send those to us because we can certainly customize those webinars and provide those. Because if you have that question and need more information, there's probably other partners that do as well. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're working with your local areas.
Okay.
Okay?
I appreciate you very much for doing this, Lisa.
Oh, not a problem. I hope we gave a lot of information quickly. So if you guys think of other questions, when we get off the phone, just let us know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hey, thanks everyone for your time. Wait, it looks like, do we have another question?
Yeah. Could you?
Oh,
No,
we did.
we've already
We
did
did.
that, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry.
All right, guys, have a good day.
Thank
You as well.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.